Adana stood on the balcony of her room, staring out into the quiet night, but her soul found no peace. Her mother's words echoed relentlessly in her mind. "You're the only one who can do this for your sister," her mother had said firmly that evening. "It has to be you, Adana." Adana turned to face her mother, desperation heavy in her voice. "Mom, I'm only 26. I have my whole life ahead of me. Why should I sacrifice my body for this? Why can't we just hire a surrogate? We can afford it." Her mother's expression hardened. "No, Adana, this isn't about money. We can't entrust something so important to a stranger. What if they take the child, or ruin everything and expose us to the world? Our family's reputation is at stake. You're the only one we can trust." Adana clenched her fists, trying to keep her composure. "But Mom, it's my body. This isn't fair." Her mother sighed deeply. "Unfair? Is it fair that your sister has been suffering for 12 years? Do you know the pain and shame she's endured? This is your chance to help her, to help our family, and you're thinking only of yourself." "Don't be selfish, Adana." Adana's voice trembled. "Mom, I love my sister, but there has to be another way. I have a relationship. I want to marry KB. How do you expect me to explain this to him?" Her mother's face darkened at the mention of KB. "That useless boy. You have no future with him. If you want what's best for yourself, stop seeing him. He'll only ruin everything for us." Tears welled in Adana's eyes. She realized convincing her mother would be impossible. "You're asking me to give up everything, Mom. My relationship, my freedom, my body. Why me?" Her mother's tone softened. "Because you're the only one who can do this. Don't think of yourself, Adana. Think of your sister. Think of our family. One day, you'll understand." Adana's heart shattered as she realized this wasn't a request. It was an order. That night, she called KB. "You don't have to do this," he said after listening to her through her tears. "Your sister can hire someone. Why should you bear this burden?" Adana whispered, her voice trembling. "But Mom says this is a family matter. She doesn't trust anyone else. I don't feel this is right, Ki, but it's a sacrifice I have to make for my family." Kibi's voice was resolute. "No, Adana, you don't have to sacrifice anything. This isn't your responsibility." Tears streamed down Adana's face as she tried to convey the weight of her situation. "You don't understand, KB. If I refuse, my mother will never forgive me. My sister will hate me. I'll be the reason our family falls apart. And what about you?" Kibi asked, his voice shaking. "What about your dreams, your happiness? Don't let them take that from you." "I have no choice, KB. Please understand." On the other end of the line, there was a long silence before he finally spoke. "Adana, I love you, but I can't stand by and watch you do this to yourself. Call me when you're ready to fight for your own happiness." The line went dead, leaving Adana alone with her thoughts and the deafening quiet of the night. The next morning, her mother was waiting in the living room. Nia sat beside her, looking both hopeful and distant, as though masking her emotions. "We spoke with the doctor," her mother announced. "The procedure is scheduled for next week. Start preparing." Adana's heart clenched. "Mom, she began, but her mother cut her off with a sharp look. "This isn't up for discussion, Adana. The decision has been made." Nia reached out, placing her hand over Adana's, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Adana. I know this isn't easy, but you're giving me a gift I could never repay." Adana's breath hitched as the weight of their expectations bore down on her. She was trapped, torn between her family's demands and her own desire for freedom, a choice no one should ever have to make. Adana looked into her sister's eyes, seeing a mix of gratitude and guilt that chipped away at her resolve. Silently, she nodded. Her mother rose, satisfied. "So, it's settled. We'll make sure you're comfortable throughout the pregnancy." Adana forced a strained smile, though inside she wanted to scream. The days leading up to the procedure were a trial. Her mother and sister took control of every detail of her life, ensuring she was prepared for what was to come. Adana felt like a prisoner in her own home, unable to voice her fears or objections. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on her chest like a heavy stone. On the morning of the procedure, her mother woke her at dawn. "Get ready," she said, avoiding Adana's gaze. Adana sat up in bed, her heart pounding. "Mom, are you sure? I'm scared. What if something goes wrong?" Her mother's face hardened. "Nothing will go wrong, Adana. The doctors are professionals. Just do what they say, and everything will be fine." Her sister Nia appeared in the doorway, impeccably dressed, as though heading to a celebration instead of a hospital. "Adana," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed, "I know this is hard for you, but I promise I'll repay you. I'll be the best aunt to your kids, just as you're helping me now." Adana looked at her sister. She loved Nia, but the resentment brewing inside her grew stronger with each passing day. Still, she nodded, suppressing her emotions. The car ride to the hospital was silent. Adana sat in the back seat, staring out the window while her mother and Nia chatted animatedly in the front. When they arrived, a nurse greeted them with a warm smile. "You must be Adana." Adana gave a faint smile in return as the nurse said, "Come with me, we'll take good care of you." She hesitated, glancing back at her mother and sister. Her mother nodded reassuringly, and Nia's eyes filled with tears. "It's going to be okay," Nia whispered. Adana followed the nurse down the sterile hallway, her steps heavy. She was led to a private room where the doctor explained the procedure in detail. But Adana could focus on nothing but the growing knot of fear in her stomach. "This will only take a few minutes," the doctor said. "After that, you'll need to rest for a couple of hours before heading home." Adana nodded, barely registering his words. She lay down on the hospital bed, gripping its edges tightly as the nurse prepared her for the procedure. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't make a sound. The procedure was quick but deeply uncomfortable. Adana felt every moment, both the physical discomfort and the emotional storm raging within her. When it was over, the nurse helped her back to her room, where she lay in silence, staring at the ceiling. A few hours later, her mother and sister arrived, their faces lit with relief. "How are you feeling?" Nia asked, sitting beside her. Adana forced a weak smile. "I'm fine." Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Adana. Now all you need to do is rest and take care of yourself. The future of this child depends on you." Her mother's words stabbed at her heart. The thought of carrying a child that wasn't hers filled her with dread. As she lay there, she wondered how long she could endure the growing weight of a sacrifice she never chose to make. Over the following weeks, Adana's life became a strictly controlled routine. She wasn't allowed to leave the house without her mother's permission. Her diet was meticulously monitored, and regular doctor visits were non-negotiable. Nia often visited, bringing gifts and words of gratitude, but Adana felt suffocated. She longed for her old life, her freedom, and most of all, Kibi. She hadn't seen or spoken to him in weeks. Her mother had ensured that, confiscating her phone and forbidding her from stepping outside unaccompanied. One night, lying in bed, Adana overheard her mother's voice through the door. "I hope she's staying away from that boy," her mother said. "She wouldn't dare," Nia replied. "Adana knows what's at stake." Adana's heart clenched. She felt like a pawn in her family's game, her feelings and desires dismissed. Yet, despite her growing resentment, she couldn't ignore the strange connection she felt to the child growing inside her. In quiet moments, she found herself talking to it, sharing her fears and dreams. "I don't know who you are yet," she whispered one night, placing a hand on her stomach. "But I hope you'll have a good life. I hope you'll be loved." Tears filled her eyes as she thought of the day she would have to let this child go. She tried convincing herself it would be easy, that she would walk away without looking back. But deep down, she knew it would be anything but simple. Adana's life became unrecognizable as her pregnancy progressed. The once vibrant and carefree young woman faded into a shadow of herself, trapped in a life entirely dictated by her family's will. Her home, which had always been her refuge, now felt like a prison. Every decision, every action was made for her, all in the name of protecting the child. Her days were monotonous. Every morning began with her mother bringing her a carefully prepared breakfast. "Eat up," her mother would say, setting down a plate of eggs and vegetables. "The doctor said you need more protein." Adana ate obediently, though her appetite had diminished. Food tasted bland, dulled by her muted emotions. After breakfast, she was made to take long walks in the garden for exercise. Her mother watched her every step, ensuring she didn't wander too far. "You're doing this for the family," her mother reminded her whenever Adana appeared weary or reluctant. Adana didn't argue. What was the point? Her voice no longer felt like her own. With each passing week, her isolation deepened, mirroring her growing belly. Most of her time was spent in her room, venturing out only for medical appointments or brief walks. Her phone remained confiscated, and visitors were strictly prohibited. One day, while sorting through clothes, Adana stumbled upon an old photograph tucked away in a drawer. It was a picture of her and Kabi at the beach, laughing and holding hands. Her heart ached as memories of happier times flooded back. Kibi's voice echoed in her mind. "You don't have to do this, Adana. Your sister can hire a surrogate." Tears welled in her eyes as she traced the photo with her fingers. She missed him, his love, the freedom they'd shared. Despite her loneliness, Adana began to bond with the child she was carrying. At night, when the house was quiet, she would rest her hands on her belly and speak softly. "Hi, little one," she whispered one evening. "I don't know what you'll look like or what kind of life awaits you, but I hope it will be a good one. I hope you'll be happy." The baby kicked in response, a small but comforting reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. Yet these moments of connection were bittersweet. Adana knew the child wouldn't be hers. The reality of her situation loomed over her like a dark cloud, and she dreaded the day she would have to say goodbye. Her relationship with Nia grew increasingly strained as the pregnancy advanced. Nia, thrilled about the baby, seemed oblivious to Adana's suffering. She often visited, bringing baby clothes and toys, enthusiastically sharing her plans for motherhood. One afternoon, Nia arrived with an extravagant stroller. "Isn't it beautiful?" she exclaimed, showing it to Adana. Adana forced a tight smile. "It's lovely," she replied curtly. Nia's face fell. "You don't seem excited. Aren't you happy for me?" Adana bit her lip, holding back her anger. "I'm happy for you, Nia, but this is hard for me. I'm the one carrying the baby, remember?" Nia waved a dismissive hand. "I understand it's tough for you, but it'll pass. Once the baby is here, everything will be fine." Adana turned away, swallowing her frustration. Deep down, she wondered how much longer she could endure this charade, and at what cost to her own soul. A wave of resentment surged within Adana. "Easy for you to say," she thought bitterly. "You're not the one sacrificing everything." Her mother was no better. She showered Nia with attention, treating her like a queen while completely ignoring Adana's needs. If Nia so much as sneezed, their mother would rush to her side with care. But whenever Adana complained about her aching back or sheer exhaustion, she was met with icy indifference. "Stop complaining," her mother snapped one evening when Adana mentioned she wasn't feeling well. "You're not the first woman to carry a child. Just do your duty and don't make a scene." Swallowing her frustration, Adana retreated to her room, feeling invisible. Her emotions, her needs, they seemed to mean nothing. One sleepless night, desperate for a sliver of normalcy, Adana decided to sneak downstairs. Forbidden from watching TV or reading the news, she craved even a fleeting sense of freedom. As she descended the staircase, she overheard a hushed conversation between her mother and Nia. Their voices, though muted, were taut with tension. "When the baby is born, we need to make sure Adana doesn't get too attached," her mother said. "She's acting strange, but she's trying to bond with the child." "She'll be fine," Nia replied confidently. "She just needs to remember her place. That baby is mine, not hers." Adana froze, her heart pounding. Their words stung like a slap. Quietly, she retreated back upstairs, tears streaming down her face. The final weeks of her pregnancy were unbearable. Her body ached constantly, her emotions swung wildly, and she felt as though she was losing herself. Her identity was vanishing under the weight of her pregnancy and her family's relentless demands. Yet she clung to a fragile hope. One day, she would reclaim her life and find happiness again. The day of the delivery arrived with a crushing mix of fear, pain, and uncertainty. From the moment she was admitted to the hospital, her mother commandeered every decision, leaving Adana voiceless. The labor was grueling and prolonged, and complications led the doctors to opt for a cesarean section. As she was wheeled into the operating room, Adana stared at the blinding lights above her, feeling both numb and terrified. She couldn't tell whether the tightness in her chest was from physical pain or the devastating realization that the child she was about to bring into the world would not be hers. The birth felt surreal. Adana felt the tug as the doctors worked, followed by the piercing cry of a newborn, a sharp, gut-wrenching sound that brought tears to her eyes. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up the tiny baby for a fleeting moment before passing her to the nurse. Adana's heart swelled with a feeling she couldn't describe. She wanted to see the baby, to hold her, even for a second. "Can I see her?" she asked weakly. But no one paid her any attention. Nia was already at the nurse's side, her arms outstretched. "Give her to me," Nia said, tears of joy in her eyes as she cradled the baby. "She's perfect." Lying on the table, Adana clenched her jaw. "Perfect, but not mine," she thought bitterly. In the recovery room, Adana tried again. "Can I hold her?" "Please." Her mother shut her down immediately. "You need to rest, Adana," she said firmly. "The baby is with Nia, where she belongs." "But I carried her for 9 months." Adana protested softly. "I just want to hold her, just once." Her mother's face hardened. "Stop being selfish, Adana. You've done your job. Let Nia enjoy her child." Days turned into weeks, and Adana's longing to connect with the baby only grew. She watched from afar as Nia paraded around the house with the infant, basking in the admiration of guests. Nia played the role of the doting mother flawlessly, spinning tales about her labor and how she had to rush back early for her baby. It was all a cruel joke, and Adana felt like the punchline. She wasn't even allowed to change a diaper or feed the baby. Whenever she tried to get closer, Nia snapped at her. "Stop acting like she's your baby. She's mine. Don't ever forget that." One evening, as Adana stood outside the nursery, she heard the baby crying. She couldn't help herself. Quietly stepping inside, she lifted the child into her arms and gently rocked her until the cries subsided. "Shh," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm here." In that moment, for the first time in months, Adana felt a flicker of peace, one she knew would be fleeting. "What are you doing?" Naya's voice cut through the silence, sharp and accusing from the doorway. Adana froze, caught in Nia's searing glare. "She was crying," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to help." "I told you to stay away from my baby." Naya's voice rose, trembling with anger as she snatched the child from Adana's arms. "Stop this obsession. You're just a vessel, Adana. That's all you ever were." Those words cut deeper than Adana could have imagined. Retreating to her room, she cried for hours, the weight of loneliness pressing on her chest like a stone. Her mother's favoritism only deepened the pain. She pampered Nia, indulging her every whim, while Adana was left to recover, physically and emotionally, all alone, her struggles met with indifference. One night, Adana couldn't hold back anymore. She confronted her mother. "Why don't you care about how I feel? I carried that baby. I endured the pain, the pregnancy, the surgery, and now you act like I don't exist." Her mother's reply was as cold as ice. "You should be grateful, Adana. You gave this family something valuable." Each passing day tore at Adana's heart. She felt used, discarded, and utterly unwanted. When Nia's 4-week stay came to an end, she announced she was leaving, with the baby. In desperation, Adana pleaded with her mother to wake her before they left so she could say goodbye. The next morning, Adana awoke late with a pounding headache. She bolted downstairs, her heart racing, only to find her mother calmly watching television in the living room. "Mom, where's Nia?" Where's the baby? Adana's voice trembled with panic. They're gone, her mother said flatly, not bothering to look away from the screen. Adana froze. But I asked you to wake me. Why didn't you? Her mother turned to her, her expression hard and unyielding. Adana, you need to let this go. That baby isn't yours. You were just the vessel to bring her into this world, nothing more. The words hit Adana like a slap. Her legs felt weak as tears streamed down her face. How can you say that? She's my niece. I have a right to be in her life. Her mother's voice rose, cutting through her sobs. No, you don't. That child belongs to Nia, and you need to accept that. Adana broke down, overwhelmed by the crushing reality of her family's rejection. Her sacrifices were dismissed, her pain ignored. Life after Nia and the baby's departure became a hollow blend of disappointment and solitude. Staying in her mother's house grew unbearable. Every room was a painful reminder of the sacrifice she had made and the love she was denied. The walls seemed to echo with indifference, a cruel testament to the baby she wasn't allowed to love and the niece she could never hold. One gray morning, as she sat by her bedroom window staring at the overcast sky, Adana made a decision. She had to leave. She had to build a new life for herself, far from her family's suffocating grasp. Adana found a job as an assistant at a local office. It wasn't her dream, but it was a step toward independence. With her savings, she rented a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, but it was hers, a space where she could finally breathe. In her new home, Adana began piecing her life back together. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of control over her future. But the nights were still the hardest. Alone in her room, she would think of the baby, her niece, and wonder if she was happy, if she was being cared for. The ache in Adana's heart remained, but so did her determination. She was rebuilding herself, one small step at a time, and she vowed that one day she would find peace. Adana missed the gentle kicks of life within her womb, those quiet reminders that she was never truly alone. Her thoughts often drifted to Kib, the one person who had truly understood her pain. She missed him but didn't know how to reach out. Their last conversation had ended in a fight, leaving her feeling even more isolated. She spent countless nights reflecting on her decision to become a surrogate. One evening, she found the courage to call him. "Hello?" His voice was cautious yet familiar. "It's me," she said, her voice trembling. A long silence hung between them before he finally replied, "Adana, it's been a while." "I know," she whispered. "I'm sorry for how things ended between us. I thought I didn't have a choice." "There was always a choice, Adana," Kebi replied, his tone sharp but laden with hurt. "You just didn't trust me enough to make it with me." His words pierced her, but she knew he was right. "I made mistakes," she admitted, "but I want to make things right. Can we meet?" They met at a small cafe that had once been their haven, a place where they had spent hours dreaming about the future. Seeing Kebi again brought a flood of emotions. She feared he would walk away, but he stayed. Kebi listened as Adana poured out her heart, how her mother had manipulated her, how used and discarded she felt, and how deeply she regretted losing him. "I was angry," he admitted, "but I never stopped caring about you. I just didn't know how to reach you." Their reunion was bittersweet, but it marked the beginning of something new. Slowly, they rebuilt the trust they had lost, and their bond grew stronger. As their relationship blossomed, Adana and Kebi decided to marry. The wedding was simple, attended only by close friends and a few supportive family members. Her mother and sister did not come. Adana had cut ties with them, determined not to let their toxicity darken her new life. After the wedding, Adana and Kebi began trying for a child. The thought of motherhood filled her with both joy and fear. She dreamed of creating the loving family she had never known. But months turned into years, and still no child came. Her initial optimism gave way to anxiety. They sought medical advice. The results were devastating. "You don't have a uterus," the doctor said gently. Adana's voice shook. How is that possible? I had a child. I carried her for 9 months. How can I not have a uterus? The doctor looked at her with sympathy. It's possible that complications during your cesarean section required a hysterectomy. If that's the case, someone would have had to consent to the procedure. Adana's mind raced. She remembered nothing about such a decision. During her delivery, her mother had handled everything. Could her mother and sister have made this decision behind her back? Her legs gave way, and she collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. They destroyed me, she sobbed into Kibi's chest. They took everything from me. Kibi held her tightly, trying to comfort her, but Adana was inconsolable. Her dreams of motherhood had been stolen by the very people for whom she had sacrificed everything. Her grief gave way to anger, and that anger became her strength. Adana vowed to confront her mother and sister, to demand the truth. Leaving the hospital in a favored haze, she drove to her mother's house, her mind a whirlwind of rage and betrayal. Stepping into the living room, she froze, her breath catching in her throat at what she saw. What she witnessed would change her life forever. Stay tuned for the second part of this story if you're intrigued by Adana's journey. I'm sure you'll love what's coming next. Click on the thumbnail to watch the next chapter, support me by liking this video, sharing it with your family and friends, and subscribing to my channel. See you in my next story. Bye!